Welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today, wherever you are in this world, in this galaxy. And as we teeter on the brink of, really, it's kind of hard to understand or how we would write up essentially the last 5 years in the history books, because we haven't really been operating in a democracy for the last 5 years, which is, what our government is supposed to be. And the great Jimmy Smith said, the great Jimmy Heath told me when I hung with him in person that jazz is the ultimate form of democracy, because when it's really going right, you're having the ultimate dialogue, conversation, and ultimately allowing people to express their truth in the moment on the bandstand and getting support from other people. Not everybody's always going to get along. There's going to be fighting. There's going to be yelling on the bandstand. But most importantly, you wind up sharing the ball, passing the rock, and coming up with a solution that makes everybody feel good. And at this point, outside of my daughters, the only thing that is keeping me connected to humanity is the Jake Feinberg Show, and I feel honored to be able to continue this process, knowing that so many people have had their livelihoods, including musicians, totally stripped away from them during this time. And I've still been able to connect with my elders, people that can stretch the lineage of the music, and most importantly, inspire younger cats to know how real music is made. And I got a chance today to talk to one of those guys who has been really just cutting himself, truly a professional musician. Came up at a time when a musician was seen as a viable profession. There was jingle work, commercial dates, TV shows, studio dates, concept albums, soundtracks, strip club gigs, 52nd Street, big bands, tonight, all sorts of stuff, road shows, and he lived through it all, and he continues today, and based off our conversation last night, is more vigorous and driven than ever to get in the groove of his own composition and his writing. I guess the question remains, for my guest and his generation, will they ever see the bandstand again? George Young, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you so much, Jake.
It's so good to hang with you, man. There's a couple of things I wanted to just talk to you about, and there's no right or wrong answers. I just wanted to know if you were, I know you were ensconced in work, but looking back on it, I just did my second interview with Joe Chambers, the drummer, and he talked to me about when Clifford Brown and Max Roach when MRC put that band together, that was actually Max's band. But because of the Eurocentric business approach, Europeans did not believe that drummers could be legitimate composers. And at that time, the only real composer who was a drummer was Max Roach. And so they flipped it and made it the Clifford Brown Max Roach band and put Clifford as the head of it. And rhythm has always been distrusted in our Eurocentric culture. And it goes back to the roots of slavery and Congo Square, and it goes back to the roots of diaspora. And I just wanted to know how important that you believe rhythm is to elevation of social consciousness and consciousness expansion.
Well, I think rhythm, if you're playing tempo music, rhythm is the basic foundation that's necessary to cradle your melody, your improvising, and whatever goes on top. The rhythm I always speak to my students and colleagues about he's either playing the drum like a musician or he's playing the drum like a drummer. And there's a difference there. A drummer that plays like a musician is seeking out some sort of, like you mentioned earlier, a dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
He's listening. He knows when to erupt. He knows when to punctuate. He knows when to get involved, like a referee. Or there's so many hats in music and in the jazz world. It's incredible. And I'd like to just add
Please.
one of my heroes and a gentleman that I got to play with many times, but never enough, was a composer. He played the drums like a musician, always. And that was Louis Bellson.
You know, talk about. He is one of the forefathers of just melodic rhythm and playing the drums as musically. How did you originally connect with Louis?
Well, as I remember, I was still living in New Jersey at the time, and I got a call from Dick Abels, who was Louis' manager and later became my manager for gigs I would do outside of the studio.
Mm-hmm.
And he handled my office when I go on the road with different notables, such as Benny Goodman or Liza or Paul Simon. He took care of my office in New York, which was right near Carnegie Hall. And I got a call from Dick Abels to play in New Jersey at Glassboro. At the time, it was called Glassboro State. It's now Rutgers University. But I played down at Rutgers. I covered for Jerry Dodgen, who couldn't make, I think he was with Mel and Thad and Mel's band.
Right.
And that was my first episode of many with Louis, with the big band, playing lead alto for him, and then later playing many more times with him touring a little. And I remember we went to Jacksonville one time, and Joe Williams, the singer from Basie's band, he was the singer, he was featured. We all went down, we flew down to Jacksonville to play the Jacksonville Festival. But anyway, Louis, I played with a small group as well. We had gigs we did in Boston and colleges and stuff. But I'd like to do a shout out for Louis Bellson because he's like an unsung hero by a lot. You know, was one of the first white drummers to integrate with Duke's band. You know, and
That's true. Because I mean, like Paul Whiteman gets a lot of credit. A lot of people thought he was kind of hokey, but then they kind of read the history and realized that he was integrating his bands and
Benny Goodman. Benny Goodman was another.
Yeah, who was the black cat in Benny's band?
Lionel Hampton.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit. You're stretching me. Talking to an absolute iconic legend here. I mean, was there a discernible difference in, like, when Louis played the big band versus the smaller combo? Did you stretch more in the smaller combo? Did you lose the downbeat? Did you leave the head of the tune and go out, or was it? Did his style change?
Oh no. We did a lot of improvising. He always encouraged improvising. Mm-hmm. He wanted everybody to blow. He wanted everybody to express themselves. And as well as with the big band, it was a little more scripted. You had so many measures to say what you had to say. But with the smaller group, it was a lot freer. You could venture into extra choruses and stuff like that. But I used to look forward to. I used to call it taking the handcuffs off, because in the studio days, we used to play everyone else's music, and it was very much regimented, following the rule of the gig. I mean, you took the gig, so you had to pay attention and do what they wanted. You know, they were buying you. It's an awful thing to say, but we're renting you various kinds of music across the board. As a studio player, sort of like a chameleon, musically, and I would always try to go out after I was finished. If I had a 7 to 10 at night, After I'd grab a little bite, I'd be out the door. I'd either have my soprano, my alto, my tenor, or something, and I would go up to McKell's
Oh my God.
in
Oh yeah.
in Harlem
Oh yeah.
and sit in with the stuff band, or go around to Jimmy Ryan's and play there, or anywhere where there was action, where you could go, as I would say, take the handcuffs off and just go play
Just
and
blow.
have some
No, dude.
fun.
It's and that was the magic because yeah, they were buying you, but let's face it. I mean, Randy Brecker and those cats in the mid '60s, their loft in the Lower West Side was like $450 a month. On in a good week in the studio, they could make that, get ahead, and then play whatever they wanted to, because live music was still. I mean, there was loft scenes, or there was, and then just like just the idea of being able to go cash your checks at Jim and Andy's, and then be waiting for studio gigs. I guess it's so beautiful, even though it might have seemed regimented. Was there, even out of the studio, the one thing that when I was hired a while ago to do radio interviews with individuals who played with Stan Getz, and actually I spent about 4 days in his Irvington estate with his second wife Monica. It was a kind of a surreal experience, but I interviewed everybody from Lalo Schifrin to Huey Lewis, and everybody and anybody in between about Stan, because obviously he was a compelling figure. But when you go back to those Four Brothers albums, and any big band, Belson, all those cats, not every horn was mic'd, not even close. In fact, in some cases, the bass wasn't even always mic'd. So you had to balance your own sound, and the horn sections had to balance their own sound, and as a result, it allowed the space in the music to breathe. What I find today, especially on the drum kit, is that every part of the drum is mic'd. There's no space. It's all quantized rhythm. And I wanted you to talk about a definitive time in the studios. You played with White Elephant, with Maynard. I know all those cats, Bob Mann, Rainey. But even before that, your generation, you had to balance your sound in a band because you did not have the technology. And I wanted you to talk about how you learned to cultivate that in your own career.
Well, it all falls back on listening and fitting yourself into putting your sound in that space that blends, that sort of blends in, like a painting, like
Right.
a sound painting. And what you're doing is like you're positioning yourself properly in the mix. Like not it doesn't always happen, with a lot of cats, but that's what I always tried to do. I was raised from a very early childhood to listen and to not overpower my strength, but just to rely upon it and to use it when I needed it.
Right,
When it was my time to play a solo, then I would step forward and I would, project a little bit more than if I'm playing in an ensemble. Ensemble playing, it's like all balancing, which comes from listening. I tell all my kids, when you're a musician, it's like you're a person with imaginary antennas. You have, when you're listening for, if you're playing tempo music, for example, let's get back to swinging. If you're playing in tempo, like a blues or a standard that moves, you're going along with that. You're listening to the time. One of those antennas is checking the time. The other is to involve yourself in the situation. So you have all these things, and if you're playing in a sax section, that's even more. You're, depending upon which chair you're playing, if you're playing lead alto, which lots of times I would get called upon to do, to lead the section,
Right.
then you should have leaned forward a little bit with the sound, and you say, musically, you say, come on, everyone, here's where we're going to go, right or wrong. And if they're listening, they're going to go with you. But at the same time, you're listening to the trombones and the trumpets. You're listening to the bass, the drum. You have all this going on. It can be confusing if you don't know how to listen to the overall. But the main thing is the music, regardless whether it's jazz, classical, ethnic music, if it's a polka or a darandelle, it's all the same. It has to be done musically. Music is the really important word with whatever you're doing. You have to always make the music happy and happening. Sometimes you have to make it sad. I'm writing a tribute memorial piece. I'm finishing this thing up, I hope today, for a dear friend, one of the cats that passed. And somehow when I play it, it's going to be hard for me to play it because I'll be thinking of Joe. But at the same time, I'll try to put a smile on a minor key, if you know what I mean. I'll try to lift it for the sake of the music. I'll try to make it. I'll remember those happy times I spent with my friend Joe in the song. Does that make any sense?
Oh, this is this is a painting, and I think it's about. I think it's about being awash in sound, and I think it has something to do with the fact that your generation grew up, and yes, you learned to read, but I've talked like Denny Sywell in the Poconos with big bands up there. I mean, they'd put like they'd shade in like a pair of eyeglasses to say, okay, quick, this is going to be a quick turnaround. Everybody learned by ear before they learned to read music. And the biggest crisis we have today in music, especially instrumental music, is that cats are coming up learning to read before they can hear. And therefore their ears are locked. You go back to Bird, even to yourself, you guys turned on the radio. He learned how to play every song in every key by hearing it first. And, if you wanted to be a serious studio musician, you obviously had to get your reading chops together, but all you guys were ear trained first. And to me, it's the biggest travesty because that's why there's a homogenization of sound and you can't tell. I mean, just take drummers, okay? You know this. Louis Bellson, Max Roach, Pete LaRocca, Mickey Roker, Tony Williams, all those cats, Joe Morello, you could tell who all of them were right away. Same with piano players. Everybody had their own individual sound. Even the studio cats, you can hear different individual sound. You put on any modern jazz today, you can't tell who anybody is. There's a homogenization of sound. People's ears are locked. They haven't learned to, I really believe the most cathartic thing will never happen. But because, here's a question for you. Can jazz, the language of jazz, truly be codified and learned in the academy?
Oh, that's a good question. Getting back to your
Go ahead.
the todayness of the jazz, I find my biggest criticism is that I'm not hearing enough music. I'm hearing more notes.
Right.
It's like a bunch of note pushers out there.
But you realize I want to say something. I want to say something. And I want to just push. Not that I agree with you totally. The reason is because they have no opportunities to get stuff out of their. Think about a night for George Young in 1965, a 7 to 10 date, get a bite to eat, go blow, have a ball, do it all again the next day. You didn't have to prove anything to anybody. You were making money. You were getting stuff out of your system. The only way younger cats can prove themselves today is through chops and technique, because they don't have the ability to play live the way you did. Continue. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, that's quite all right. Well, an important factor with listening. Let's go back to listening, and let's add another important word
Mm-hmm.
to the mix, and that word is sensitivity. How many people are thinking about music when they're playing? Are they thinking about themselves?
Mm.
Are they in the way of the music because of their ego? Because they're trying to prove something? Well, this is how many notes I got going on here. I figured all this stuff out. It's coming at you, so watch out. It sounds, that's what I hear. I hear a lot into my analyzations of the music that I listen to. I'll listen to the music station, to like the jazz station. I'll listen to I'll go to classical music, and I'm very sensitive with dynamics and
Absolutely.
stuff.
Oh yeah.
If it's too loud and too much banging, can you hear me okay?
Oh, I see. Perfect. Yeah.
I just find that we're talking basically about jazz, and that's my not criticism, but that's my take on what I hear today with jazz. There's some brilliant playing going on. Oh, altissimo notes all over the place, playing up in the stratosphere, and to make those notes sound like part of the horn, a lot of them are doing it, but they're not always using it for the music. They're using it for themselves. And I think the best music is the music that's selfless, that has no ego. You call on your ego to fire it up and then dismiss it immediately. It's like that old expression, leave it at the door. When you come in, leave it at the door. Well, it's a similar kind of an expression. The best music, like you take Train. Train worked all that stuff out, but he took chances. He took chances. He was playing at a very difficult time for him. He was a black man. Archie Shepp, who I graduated high school in '55 with. Archie, what a wonderful, wonderful cat he was as a student. He was my friend.
I love this.
And yes, and Bob Caldwell and Reggie Workman. We all
Oh my God!
graduated in
This.
'55.
Oh my God! Are you kidding me? This is on. I no, but
I'm serious.
I mean
I
no.
swear
I
to
mean I know,
God.
but here's the thing.
I sat right in front of Lee Morgan at orchestra practice. He never left his stand. He would stay on the breaks, and he would play his horn at the floor. No one could hear what he was doing, and I looked. I was very young. I was in junior high school and high school. We're playing in the all Philadelphia, all city high school orchestra and concert band. There was lots of activity back in those days for kids, and we would get to play all kinds of stuff, all kinds of music, and very little jazz. Very little jazz. We would play. A bunch of kids would get together. We had a rhythm section. I had Reggie was the bass player, and Alex, who we just lost, he was the pianist, and Walter Painter was the drummer. A lot of these names you don't know. But
No, wait, hold on. What's the pianist's last name?
Fiorillo,
You spell
who
that?
became Alex Fiorillo. He was an amazing classical pianist. He was Vladimir Horowitz's favorite student through the '60s. Later became he practiced so much he blew out his hands with tendonitis, serious tendonitis, and he wound up becoming the professor of piano for 40 years at Temple University College in Philadelphia. He was the professor of piano there. But anyway, we would take a break on the orchestral breaks, and Lee would sit back there. My cousin was playing one of the trumpet chairs. I knew what he was doing. He was working out his vocabulary. He was putting a vocabulary together.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear. On your breaks, you were listening to Coltrane.
No, no, no. On the breaks, we were kids. We would just go down. We would go down to the luncheonette and play the pinball machines, and we'd go back upstairs, ready for the next. For
No,
after
no,
the
no, no. But I
intermission.
mean, but who did you hear that when you realized who was the person you said that you realized what they were doing?
Lee Morgan.
Okay, Lee Morgan. I get it. Okay, yeah. So, um, this is really where the rubber meets the road for Jake Feinberg. I'm just gonna throw these names out there. These are to me, uh, Joe Beck, Garnett Brown, Irby Green, Dick Hyman, Bill Lavorgna, Jerome Richardson, Ernie Royal, George Young. I mean, here's the point: is that you know everybody now grows up, my generation and younger. Yeah, they can get together for jam sessions, but you guys were playing together all the time, and getting paid for it. Most cats are playing in isolation today. So a lot of times they get used to getting themselves off. They start wanking it. They start playing stuff that they like you said, the sensitivity factor. You were brought into sessions with real human beings. You weren't, I mean, yeah, you shed it obviously on your own, but it was communal music. So you learned sensitivity, you learned dynamics, you learned to say what you need. I remember Larry Coryell in one of our interviews, Miles told him, never finish your phrases. Stop before you're done. Or Liebman said that to me. That was the ultimate aesthetic in jazz. Whereas, and I can't really fault cats today. They don't have daily, relentless opportunities to play different kinds of music with different kinds of cats and actually walk away. You knew at the end of the day you could go to Jim and Andy's and cash your check. You could sing for your supper. And today it's riffology is great, but after a while, if you don't have any soul, I just wind up staring at the wall. I mean, when I listen to you, you guys just came from a different generation. But I did want you to did you ever, like Jufrey had a Road to Damascus moment with Swallow and Paul Bley. Were you in a drummerless trio, or were you ever in any live band that, or just in general, did you ever experiment with a band with no rhythm section or no drummer?
We had a trio in New York.
Oh boy.
We had a trio, and we had Dr. Lynn Christie playing bass.
Absolutely, dude. I think Lynn Christie played with Tal Farlow a lot.
All right, and piano, Mike Abeni.
Oh man, I haven't gotten to a Benny yet. A Benny, Lynn Christie,
And me.
and George. Are you kidding me? Were you playing like the half note?
Swear to God. Swear to God.
Where were you playing? What gigs did you play?
We used to play all the time. Jack Tafoya on 57th Street. He was down the road from where my place was. He was further west 57. He said, I have an idea. Why don't you guys put a trio together? And that's what we did. And then all of a sudden, we went down to play on the radio. We played the New York station. It was I think it was a PBS station in New York City.
Was it WBAI or something like that?
It wasn't like one of the full-blown stations.
Right. It was just like, yeah, it was, yeah, I dig. I mean,
it was a local. And we played, and Marty Morell, the drummer who was with...
oh, yeah. Yeah, he's hot. I'm still looking for Marty.
Bill Evans, I believe, right?
Yeah. I'm still looking for him, yeah.
Well, he's in Florida.
Right. No, I mean, what I'm saying, so Marty would come in and play with you guys?
No, but he heard us, and he didn't like us. He said, you cats didn't sound that good, man. And we took it as it was cool, man. we weren't happy, but we took it and we try, we said, well, what can we do better? He said, just play more, just play more. We had been playing quite a bit. I thought we were really kicking it.
He didn't mean play more notes. He just said play more together.
Play more together.
Right. No, you know what? Here's the thing. I want you to talk to younger cats because we've gotten kind of fixed into these roles about what the rhythm section is supposed to do. Someone like Sun Ra back in Chicago when they were playing fraternity parties, he just pointed Julian Priester, the bone player, and he had to solo, and he had to have his own individual time, and that would free up the rhythm section to play melodically. And I'm just wondering in this, if you could just talk about in a drummerless trio, how you learned to keep your own internal time feel without relying on a drummer.
Well, time is that's really, it's difficult to explain that, but time is like either you have it or you don't. I mean, it's you can try to instill it,
yeah.
And sometimes it happens that, and then plus 40 plus years, Jake, with earphones on, with a click track most of the time when you're working from 10 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, sometimes later, that can only make your time more critical. I mean, the time, if you come in with time, if you're a player who has the gift of tempo, of time, then that's a gift. That's a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times cats don't have that. They don't have that. The ones that do survive in jazz. In jazz, you have to have time. I'm sorry. You have to be able to snap your fingers on 2 and 4, or if the time signature gets more complex, you have to be able to negotiate. You have to be able to navigate through it consistently. You can't rush. You can't drag. You got to stay. If the music's supposed to have a pocket, then the best time. I try to teach time awareness by using a protractor. I have a hypothetical. I like to share this with you and maybe your listeners.
Go ahead.
And you check it out and see if it works for you. But if you were to hypothetically take a protractor, 90 degrees is the center of the beat. You never go wrong being in the center. You might not be a ferocious swinger, but at least you'll be able to be in step with the rest of the rhythm section if you play in the center of the time. Now, our black brothers and sisters, for the most part, Count Basie, Louis Bellson, I'm going to count him in there, Duke Ellington's band, Ray Charles, you go behind 90 degrees, hypothetically, now you're leaning towards 0. You're opening up the beat. You're playing behind the time. You're furnishing a pocket in the time, in the tempo. The tempo's gaining a pocket. You have, for horn players, it's delicious because you can breathe. The music breathes easier because it's a little behind 90. A lot of our black brothers and sisters, they go way back. Way back. You think it's going to fall off, 0. But then if you look forward, when you do on a film date, for example, let's go the other way now. Let's go forward towards 180. Sometimes you'll be playing, the music there's a chase scene. So you're going to lean the time forward, but everyone's going to go that way. Everyone's going to launch forward. And that saved us. My philosophy of time saved us on a date one time. We were on a date, and the rhythm section was pre-recorded, and it was a bunch of young people. and they were going to put the voice on after we finished putting the horns on the track. And we were having a terrible time trying to make it sound right time-wise because it would fluctuate. But they were using a click track, but they were floating in front of 90, behind 90. And I brought this to awareness to the horn section. We had Alan Rubin, we had Lawrence Feldman, we had Randy was there, we were all on this date, and that particular time, that made us leave that date very. We didn't talk about how proud we were.
But 70s, there were patrons getting up saying, "Make him stop! Make him stop!" You know, they were. He was. It was prayer music, but they were accustomed to a. You know, I don't know. There was clearly a color bar. Always, there was a division.
It was the culture, Jake. It was the culture.
I just want to know. I just want to know. I want to know from your point of view. You know, because you know, you read these. You see this liner notes. Bill Evans and Stan Getz, and they talk about these two tracks of Getz's beautiful melodic music versus the angry message music of Train and Archie Shepp. And as a 42-year-old, I'm like, as a journalist, I'm like, holy crap, would I be labeling that as message music? Would I get pressured into doing that? How did you see it and hear it when you would stay and see those cats?
Well, they were complaining through the music. The art was a social message.
Right. Democracy.
Honest.
Yeah.
They were being, it was their truth.
Right. I love it.
Okay? It was, the music was exemplifying the truth of the time. It's still happening. Unfortunately, it's still happening. And it's just like any art, valid art says what it's doing. It tells you. It was terrible. I mean, it was bad then, but it's still not cool, and it comes through in the music. It's polished up a little bit. I mean, Wynton has done so much. He has done so much. He and Branford. I love those cats, man. Yeah. It's just, you know, you dressed it up, but going back to those days, I remember those days when I was listening to the jazz station WRTI in Philly, in my home in Woodbury. I was living in Woodbury, New Jersey, and I heard this tenor, this just squealing out. I'm saying, "Oh my God, what's that?" It was the first time it got my attention. I'm at the table, and I had this radio just up, and they just played Artie Shaw or somebody, you know. And then and then when the disc jockey finally said that was Archie Shepp, I said, "Archie Shepp? It can't be. It can't be. That's not my Archie." Sure enough, it was.
Okay, well, this is so important because, for what it's worth, and I'll let you go off in any way you want to.
He was complaining musically.
Right. No. So being that you were schoolmates with him, I want to go back to this. I want to read you this quote. And then I want you, because you just basically broke some new news here. And again, this is from my second interview with Joe Chambers. He said, writers and journalists had this term they used called avant-garde. They were talking about free jazz. Stanley Crouch, rest in peace, said that free avant-garde music is what we were doing on Blue Note in the mid-'60s, not Shep and Albert Eiler. You could hear all the tradition in those Blue Note recordings. We could swing, we could play the blues, we could run through changes. Those cats, Eiler and Shep, were around doing their thing, but they couldn't play no tunes. They couldn't play no changes. Those cats were playing altissimo, squeaks and squawks. They couldn't get a job at Radio City or backing up a singer. Eric Dolphy doesn't belong in that group because Eric was a traditional musician. He knew everything and played in symphonic orchestra. Pharoah Saunders was playing changes way back then. Even when Train started doing the altissimo, they accepted it because they had heard him play before. All Shep and Eiler could do is what they did. Shep got better and as of today can play changes. Now, what you just said.
Yes.
But did Shep go from a traditional musician to altissimo, or was he always altissimo?
Well, here's starting at the beginning.
Yes.
Archie would always come into orchestra rehearsal. He would be the first one there. He played clarinet, not so good. He wasn't a really good clarinet player. But he'd sit at the piano and play Pennies from Heaven, and you swear it was Earl Gardner.
No.
Yes.
Oh, my God.
And he was
sick.
always dressed like he was going on set. He was immaculately dressed every day like a fashion plate. That's how I remember him in school. He was not a member of our little kiddie jazz band, which lasted for like maybe 30 seconds because, we were studying. We were doing our academics and stuff, plus practicing. I was a practicer. I was practicing my clarinet and my saxophone and working on my, whatever. But it's later when I heard him there, I said, oh my God, what happened? And then I figured it out. I figured it out that he was playing his truth. That's how he felt.
Would you, so let me ask you, but I mean, would you consider, I just want to know because, yeah, he wasn't part of your, and I think it's so cool you guys had that brilliant working group, whatever the music you were playing, but he was, basically what Chambers was saying is that if you go back to the mid-'60s, Freddie Hubbard, Breaking Point, Bobby Hutcherson, Oblique, Andrew Hill stuff, that was avant-garde jazz. In Stanley, again, for what it's worth, Stanley Crouch was a free player, but he said that was actually the real avant-garde music because they were traditional musicians exploring the history, changes, could play ballads and blues. Would you consider Archie a traditional musician who then started playing his truth, or was he always off the grid?
I think standards, I think that Archie did have an understanding of standards, harmonies. I think it's because he displayed that with the piano when he'd sit down at the piano.
That's a mind-blowing story. Yeah, that's it. So he had that command, but then...
He did. I'm not saying to what degree, but I certainly remember him playing tunes as opposed to what I heard on the radio on the tenor. I never heard him play at saxophone until that day I heard him playing on the radio.
Wow.
And then I got a phone call. I got a voicemail from him, and I was so bummed that I missed the call. He talked for about 45 seconds, which is a long time. There's a guy in Boston who I love. He worked on Getz's he might be a good guy to call, too, to do an interview.
Who's that?
Emilio Lyons, the sax doctor.
Oh, yeah, no, he worked on his mouthpieces. Yeah, I know that cat, yeah.
He worked on his saxophone.
Yes.
Emilio works on Kenny Garrett's horns. He works on my horns. He worked on Phil, Branford, Michael, Getz, Sonny Rollins, Jackie McLean. He has stories.
Oh, I interviewed him. He's a deep cat. But You're telling me the first time you heard in the music, what was like? Archie was just a clarinet cat at that point, or he played piano a little bit.
In high school, he was clarinet and piano. I much liked his piano playing better than his clarinet playing at the time.
Did you? Yeah.
Recently, in the last year, when he called me and left me a message, he was so sweet and so loving. To me, for me, the way I sounded. He said that I had inspired him to play the saxophone when he got out of school. That knocked me out, and I carry that around with me very proudly because Archie, I just love Archie, man. I loved him as a kid when we were kids, you know? I mean, he didn't have too much to say then, but boy, he said a lot in that phone call in those 45 seconds. It was amazing.
I want to ask you a question, Joe, because this is only set one, so we're going to have to do another set real soon. Can you talk to me, like, when I've done a bunch of interviews with Chuck Rainey, and he talked about, the already established cats that preceded Purdy and, the guys from Stuff, Gordon, all those cats who I've interviewed, was like Everett Barksdale. Those guys were on Long Island. If the weather was bad and they couldn't get in, the younger crew of cats would get the calls, like Rainey. They were living in the city at that time, Jerry Jamot. Who were the predecessors to you in the horn sections in the studios in that earlier because you were in Jersey coming up in the 60s, and you were one of the mainstays, but that earlier generation, many of whom are not here anymore, who were they?
Well, they weren't all jazz players, that's for sure. Well,
let's throw the terms away. It's all music. That's what Duke said.
Pardon me?
Let's just throw the terminology away. It's all music, right?
It's all music, yes. But if you're looking for the jazz players were coming in. You had Frank West. He was doing dates.
I'm talking about guys when you showed up in the early 60s, and you're like, and this guy's like, yo, man, just keep your head down, and like, who were the guys, not necessarily looked up to, but who were the entrenched studio cats that were there that in the 50s before you established yourself in the 60s?
Well, in the saxophone section, we had Phil Bodner. We had Phil Bodner. We had one of my fondest mentor. Well, he was a mentor, but the real mentor for me was Romeo Penquay.
Oh my God, dude! This is unbelievable.
You had Wally Kane. You had You had Sid. Ray Beckenstein, Danny Bank.
Jeez, this is so out of my. Those guys were like, were they more like? Because everybody trained Sonny, Charlie Neville, who went to Africa with Archie Shepp, Tootie. Not Tootie, but all those cats. Cannonball, they all walked the bar. Like they were all doing R&B before they got into bebop. So the blues was right alongside the jazz. If you took those cats that you just mentioned out of the regimented studio scene, were they R&B players? They really were not beboppers, or maybe they were. What was their gravy?
Well, the only one that was a bebopper that I remember was you had Frank West, you had Jerry Dodgen. I bumped into Jerry a lot. But, speaking of walking the bar, the first and only time I ever heard John Coltrane was with Daisy May and the Hepcats when I was a kid in Wildwood, New Jersey at the Riptide.
Oh
and he was
my
walking the
God.
bar.
Oh
I
my
swear to
God.
God.
Dude, I knew the nugget of gold he was walking the bar. I love it, dude. I freaking
Daisy May and the Hepcats.
that George, you just made my year, man. What so I mean that must have been I mean I'm not saying he enjoyed it or disliked it, but what did you think? What kind of Grease and what kind of that R&B? Because let's be, I mean, a lot of people, whatever people you've played on a lot of R&B,
Let
really.
me give you. Let me give you.
I
Let me
know.
give you the setting.
Let me just ask you this question because this is important. R&B, soul. You did a lot of '70s dates, but that was a different kind of R&B. There was a payola scandal in the late '50s. R&B was like what rap is today. Very raunchy lyrics, anything goes. But in when you think about the masters of the music that we've been talking about, Train, Sonny, all the what that Daisy May stuff, what did it give them in their bag? How did it increase their musical bag? How did it expand their repertoire being in those settings?
Well, I think what it did is it pushed them to want to get into better things than just playing a couple of chords.
Yeah, I did.
Here's the setting, though. You have to realize there's a bunch of us young kids, young cats in Wildwood, New Jersey, playing. You have Herbie Fields coming in. You have Louis Jordan.
Oh,
And
man.
every time a notable older than we were came to Wildwood, the word would buzz out and right away, oh, we got to go catch this guy. So on a break, we'd all run and stand in the back of the club near the door like a bunch of scared kids because we weren't old enough to be in there and drink, but they knew we wanted to hear the music. We wanted to hear this special guy. And the word was out on John. We went over and we're standing there and he's we got to catch this cat. So we went over and he's playing gorgeous, big sound, and he's walking the bar at one point. And we didn't even know he wasn't John Coltrane yet. He was John Coltrane doing like, he was sort of like doing windows musically, if you know what I'm saying.
I'm just saying, this is like, this is the greatest stuff. I feel so humbled to be able to talk to somebody because
it's true,
well,
man.
no, I mean Steve Swallow. We've done a couple interviews, and he's like, I mean, he saw Train walk the bar in Connecticut, and I mean this was the ghettos were a different kind of ghettos, but ultimately those guys. I mean, it was. And here's the point: bebop is a very heady, sped up, intellectual language of music, which, by the way, can be danced to. People, Joe Chambers, again, I keep referencing him, but when he was in high school, they'd be playing R&B tunes, but then he'd say, let's dance, let's do the bop, let's do the bop. You could dance to bebop. But then the ballrooms got but when the ballrooms, the surtax came in, ballrooms were shut down, eliminated the big bands, and then these smaller clubs that you used to go and jam at, they'd put up signs saying no dancing. But the players never felt that way. That's the biggest travesty to bebop is that the writers thought, you can't, it's too fast, it's too frenetic. The smaller clubs prohibited dancing of this music, but there were people, you could do the bop. And to me, it was brilliant to go from this raw, relatively simplistic R&B music to bebop. I mean, and then you could really cook with grease as opposed to basically just being in, and I go back to this thing about the academy where everything's so in your head, it's so intellectualized now, very little's coming from the primordial gut. I mean, let's face it, the jazz life, you made a decision to sing for your supper and support your family and get paid for it, and you did gigs. But, man, how many geniuses died broke playing this amazing American art form? It's really pretty
Very
amazing.
true.
I mean, George, can we this week, I'll call you later today, but we do set 2 this weekend or something, if that works?
Let's see what day might be workable for
Yeah,
me.
I'm backed up against the. I got another guest. We just blew through an hour here.
Okay. We
Yeah,
can do more.
yeah,
Let's
absolutely.
let's let's talk on Sunday.
You want to do like around noon Pacific on Sunday?
Yeah, 12:30 would be good.
Sounds perfect, man. We'll pick up where we left off. It was great. I'm glad we got that Wildwood story out of you. That's unbelievable.
Oh yeah, and
Oh
don't forget Lee's.
no, we're gonna go. We're gonna do a
We
deep dive into Workman. Also, is in my third book coming out, and I got a great excerpt about Art Davis that he told me. So we got a lot. We're gonna dive into Philly and Sam Reed, and yeah, we're just getting started here, George. It was a great hang, man.
Okay, well, thank you for including me in your wonderful work you're doing, man. And
Dude, you're one of the cats, man. Yeah, yeah, no, George,
yeah,
we'll be in touch, man, and I'll get you a copy of this later today.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, be cool, man.
Have a good one.
Later.